Again, I welcome everyone today as we think about choices that we make in our life. Understanding God's call, as we also hear in today's gospel, Jesus says it's the better part to make the choice, particularly when we think about preference for those who are poor. To be able, as a faith community and as a larger church, to see the world as our community. We welcome this morning Sister Susan Gatz, as I've mentioned. She and her community, she'll say much more about this. As I experienced hearing her last night, that her community is very much energized with the same spirit of justice, of peace, of compassion, doing the right thing and making the right choice. Susan will speak, and after that there will be a second collection. I'll say more about that later. The first collection will be for the parish. The second collection, again, will be for the mission that Susan and her community are involved in. So without further ado, let's welcome Susan.
Good morning. What an impressive group you are. I spent about 2 hours before I came a couple of weeks ago. Before that, I called Father de Breiker to just talk about the parish and how things would go. I spent about 2 hours on your website, reading through the bulletin, kind of looking at everything. And since then, I've been so excited to think about coming and being with you. Because, as Father Jim said, there seemed to be I thought, these people, they really get the gospel, and that the stories that I'll tell will resonate in your hearts because your hearts are already there. As Father said, I'm Sister Susan Gatz, and I'm a Sister of Charity of Nazareth. That's Nazareth, Kentucky, not Nazareth, Israel. We were founded right there on the Kentucky frontier in 1812, and we've been around that long in the United States. And then in 1947, we went to India, and then we went to Nepal, and then we went to Belize in Central America, which is a really tiny little country of about 350,000 people, right next to Guatemala, where you all have your sister community. And then we went to Botswana in Africa, which is right next to South Africa, where you all have your arm-in-arm outreach. The first reading in the gospel today invite us to think about what it means to give the gift of presence to someone, to really be present to them. Abraham, these 3 people, quick, make rolls, get the steer, get some curds and put them in the shade. And Mary of Bethany, sitting at Jesus' feet, giving him her complete presence. For a moment, just think what it means to you when someone is really present to you, when they really listen to you, when you know that they're there giving you their full attention. Valuable, valued, worthwhile, respected, cared about. This morning, I'd like to share 2 stories with you of the ways that our sisters are present to people on the margins, in very caring and concrete ways. The first story I want to tell is about our sister Paula, who for many years with her companion, Sister Margaret, who was a school sister of St. Francis, worked for about 30 years in the Delta of Mississippi. They were both nurse practitioners, and they worked in a clinic serving very underserved people in some of the poorest counties in the country, actually. And without the subsidy that our two congregations gave them, that clinic could never have survived. And so these two women were there because their communities were supporting them to be there and serving people who would not have health care, not have quality health care, if it weren't for those two women there. So Paula had a patient, Willie Mae, an elderly woman, who after a while couldn't come to the clinic anymore because her health was deteriorating. So Paula used to go and visit her to monitor her health. She visited her in her pretty dilapidated little home, and she'd go and she'd see how she was doing, and Willie Mae's memory was starting to fail her, and Paula would go and she'd visit, and sometimes she'd bring some homemade bread, or she'd go shopping for her. She might clean the house a little bit, and she'd sit and she'd talk with Willie Mae. Eventually, Paula helped her to move into a local nursing home because it became obvious that she could not live alone anymore. So one day, Paula went to visit Willie Mae, and she came in and she was coming down the hall toward her room when Willie Mae was coming out of the dining room with an aide. An aide was helping her back to her room. So this aide says to Willie Mae, "Hey, who is that coming to visit you?" And Willie Mae, who couldn't remember Paula's name, didn't skip a beat, and she turned to the aide and she said, "She's the one who loves me." Around the world, our sisters strive to give that kind of presence to people, attentive, caring, loving, respectful. The second story I want to share with you is about our sister Lena, who is a social worker in Bhaktiyarpur, India. Lena runs, among other things, she runs an informal education program for the children who are rag pickers in the slum that's near where the center is. Now, these rag picker children, and they start like from 5 years up into high school, get up early every morning, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and they zip out and they scour around in the town to see what overnight they can gather up that might be resellable. Cans, bottles, rags, paper, anything that they can resell, because that's how they make their money. That's how they help support their family. So because they're out in the mornings particularly doing that, they can't go to the regular school. So Lena and her staff run this informal education program in the afternoon. When I was there a couple of years ago, they were having a program. It was India Republic Day, and so obviously they had assigned some of these children ahead of time to give a little speech of some kind, a poem or some little piece about the history of India. So these children, when they got up, you could see they were really nervous. As you can imagine, there they had to stand up in front of like 70 or 80 other students and the staff. And then now they had this American sister also listening to them. So that only added to the stress. So they would give their little speech. And no matter how it went, they got rousing applause at the end. And you could see the relief on their faces and the kind of pride as they went back to their seats. And I remember thinking, when do these children ever get affirmation? Because they're really considered kind of worthless in that society. But Lena and her staff are giving them a kind of presence that lets them know that they're worthwhile and that they deserve respect and that they're capable. They're providing them with skills and education, minimal though it is, that can give those children hope that someday, maybe, their lives can be more than collecting trash. So Lena had gotten a donation, and what she did is she bought bars of soap. And each of the children came up, and she gave each one of them a bar of soap. And they were so excited to have this gift of soap. Because they're so poor, there's no way that they can save up enough rupees to buy a whole bar of soap ever. So what they do is they'll like take a rupee and they'll buy a little piece of soap that's sold in these little small stores that are around all over the place. And they use that up until it's gone, and then they take another rupee and they go get another little piece of soap. So just imagine that a bar of soap is like gold to you. I invite you, when you wash your hands, when you take a shower or a bath, and you use your bar of soap, to think of those children and the millions like them around the world who live that way. I just wanted to scoop those children up and put them in a situation where they could really be children, where they could go to a real school, and where the potential that you could see in their faces and in their eyes could be developed for them. As I conclude, I want to finish the story of Sister Paula and Sister Margaret. 4 years ago in August, they were murdered in their home in Mississippi, brutally stabbed to death by a man who the police arrested 2 days later and who confessed to that crime. The day after his arrest, our community, the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth, and the School Sisters of St. Francis, and representatives of their two families called a press conference because of the hateful things that we were seeing on social media about this man. For years, we have advocated against the death penalty, and we wanted to make it perfectly clear that in spite of the horrific violence that had been done to these two beloved women of ours, we had not changed our minds. We were also present at the sentencing hearing for him for two reasons. One is we wanted him to hear from us the pain that he had caused our congregation, and to that local community where those people no longer had that kind of quality health care. And the second thing we wanted him to hear was that we forgave him and that we would pray for him. Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who persecute you. That gospel call went deep into our hearts, and it's changed our congregation forever. The resurrection part of that story is now there are 3 sisters living in that house and ministering in that place, building on the foundation that Paula and Margaret had laid over those years. You all are doing so much in this parish. It's really impressive and inspiring. Still, I invite you to think about joining us in some way. Surely your financial contribution will help our mission to go on. But also, I invite you to look at our website. We have a wonderful volunteer program. Our sister Luke takes people to Belize, to Botswana, to Appalachia, to India. You might want to think about joining us on one of those trips. We have a disaster relief team, people who've been trained, and when there's a tornado or a hurricane or a flood in an area, again, we organize teams to go and be with those people to help them begin to get their lives back together. We have an associate program for men and women who are interested in being a part of the spirituality of charity and want to kind of do that in a way that's a part of a larger community. And I invite any young women who are out there, I'm not sure, to think about becoming a Sister of Charity of Nazareth. It's a wonderful life. And you have a daughter or a granddaughter who's thinking about what is she going to do with her, as the poet says, her one wild, precious life. To think about, at least consider, religious life. And I ask you to pray with us that we, like Mary of Bethany, can continue to sit at the feet of Jesus in his people and give that loving, life-giving presence to them. Thank you.